Yo, what up? It's Eric, aka The Bag of Chandler, aka Catch a Case.
Yo, what up? It's Jeff, aka Breaking Down the Dutch, aka Germany.
We're It's the Real. We have a brand new podcast called The Blog Era. Go binge that right now. Shout out to the Fly Fidelity podcast, the only podcast that we listen to when we're in London,
when we're in Manchester,
when we're in Sheffield,
when we're in Wales,
or anywhere across the ocean. Shout out to you guys. We'll see you soon. Bow, bow, bow. Blocka, blocka, blocka.
First I say, what we're going to do. Then you say, I don't know, what do you want to do? What we're going to do, what you want to do.
I have an idea.
You're going to dig this.
The Fly Fidelity podcast
Is the solution. It's the best.
Check it out.
You want to get super fly.
Details just ahead.
Do you love credible content, but hate
how long you have to wait?
and who wants
super thick and frothy dumpster juice with rat corpses in it?
There's a better way.
Fly Fidelity.
Fly Fidelity.
Fly Fidelity. Fly Fidelity.
Fly Fidelity.
Fidelity. Fly Fidelity podcast.
Fly Fidelity, baby. Fidelity, baby. Fidelity.
With your host, Luke Bailey.
Welcome to the program. On this episode, we're digging into the discourse of blogs and their impact between 2007 and 2012. Collectively known as It's the Real, Jeff and Eric Rosenthal join us to talk about their 10-part podcast, The Blog Era. We'll be talking about the Wild West of music distribution and discovery, and so much more on this episode. Enjoy the conversation. Could you both maybe talk about any lessons from your story and having had viral success in the past that kind of, I guess, contributed any kind of perspective to the story you're telling about the blog era?
We are storytellers, not just at heart, but in practice. So when you're talking about 15 years of a career so far, and we've done what may look like a wide range of things, whether that's sketch comedy or original music or long form interviews, what ties everything together is our ability to tell stories in an inventive and a deeply felt way. And we've never told a story as big as the blog era or as lengthy as the blog era. And so I think that we were both prepared for it and also being thrown in the deep end. So all we could do, and by the way, we threw ourselves in the deep end. This wasn't like, we were tossed in. This was our own decision. We wanted to do this. It was in the very beginning stages of the pandemic. And but as storytellers, I think that we had the tools, but we had never put them into practice yet. And to find out what we thought worked and what we enjoyed and what we believed we could convey was an extremely fun process. And you see the results now. Yeah,
I think that, even though this is so different in a lot of ways from what we've done, I looked at pictures from August of 2020 today, when we were first breaking the story, meaning like breaking it down into different sections, and here's the 10 episodes, and the structure remains the same from 3 years ago till today. So the hard part, we almost got immediately. We did all the interviews very quickly. It's just about picking the right quotes and really the scoring that really elevated everything. But all these things are tools that we've had for 15 years, and even beyond that, like doing videos as kids under Eric's direction. So I think that even though the format is different, I think that the output and the work and care that was put in is all the same.
Absolutely. What's the story behind the story you're telling? How did this come together?
I mean, we lived it. I think, but what really happened is that for 5 years, we had a podcast where people would come over to our apartment in New York and they would tell their life story over an hour and a half. And so that was everybody from Cardi B and Rick Ross to Dave, to Michael Dappa. Everybody would come over. All these behind the scenes people would come over, but they would, and we would go through their life story. But then when the pandemic hit, it was like, oh, we can't do that same thing. Even though, yes, the technology was there to do that, we felt like doing an impersonal interview was not what we wanted for that sort of show. And then, we were at this sort of crossroads where it was just like, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do a narrative podcast. Something that told a much deeper story, and Eric was like, well, then if we have to do something we care about. And his first idea after going for a walk by himself was to do a thing on the blog era.
And we felt that the blog era, if you've been on social media at all over the last decade, you have seen the blog era referenced and people reminiscing and keeping it alive in some form or fashion. And I was like, you know what? We were there. We were on the front lines. We should be the ones to tell this story. We have the access. We have the time. Why don't we do this before an unnamed large corporation comes through and tries to sell us back our experiences? We were like, let's do this properly and authentically. And because we were there, we know a lot more truths than the public does. Let's put this out there and properly represent.
What's going on? It's your man Drake. I want to give a shout out. I want to extend my respect to the whole Not Right family, SK. I'm a big supporter, man. I go on every day, check it out, and I'm always, flattered when I'm on there. So from us here, October Zone, man, we appreciate you. We're looking forward to doing a lot in the future, man. Shout out Not Right.
Decisions get made on the highest floors of Midtown Manhattan high-rises, where each corner office has incredible views of the city. Everything outside, it seems, moves in slow motion. From those heights, it's just as easy to dream up the big picture as it is to lose track of what's happening down on the street. In 2007, for anyone in entertainment, there were only so many appointments to see the gatekeeper. If you wanted to make it to the top, you either waited for the elevator or hit those stairs. Until a small number of kids behind keyboards began to ignore those buildings and erected their own. These were the blogs.
I'm like, dude, what the fuck is a blog?
We thought it was going to change the world. It was the wild, wild west.
Blogs were personalized websites dedicated to hip-hop music and culture, run by people outside the system.
You want me to give you my music for free? Are you nuts?
He's like, don't you like computers and shit? And he's like, did the typing move with his hands and shit. I was like, fuck yeah.
I didn't see the storm that was coming.
The most influential and popular blog in this universe, NowRight.com, was curated by a guy working in IT who lived in Yonkers, New York.
My name is SK. I'm the founder of NowRight.com, and that's about it.
He saw what those executives could not, that unique voices weren't being heard.
If you're talking about the blog era and you're not talking about NowRight, you're just not talking about the blog era.
Drake was a child actor from Canada. Wiz Khalifa was a little-known stoner from Pittsburgh who had been dropped by his label.
Yeah, man, it was such a crazy time, bro. Like,
Kid Cudi, Nicki Minaj, J. Cole, Vashti, Combat Jack, and countless more found a path towards substantial careers because the bloggers built them the platform.
That year, we probably took home like 1.4.
It was like, you'll leave here a millionaire for sure.
This is the story of what happens when you make enough noise.
No one really gives a fuck until you make them give a fuck.
And how those in power went to extreme lengths to shut them up.
Later on down the line, yeah, it got a little messy. I don't know who let the fox into the henhouse.
It's about names you know and superstars you don't. Industries shaken to their core and the fight for the control of pop culture.
Complex took it from us. Complex sold it to advertisers and had to give that income to the record companies. And then the record company skipped us and just said, fuck it.
It's also the story of supreme betrayal.
If I want to do something to him, I go to St. Louis and slap the shit out of him.
Federal agents knocking down doors.
Cops in full gear jumped out with M16s drawn, told me to get on the ground, and I did just that.
And people who created out of love losing everything.
How much did your stomach sink?
Oh, it was horrible. I mean, it's literally a car crash.
I'm Eric Rosenthal.
And I'm Jeff Rosenthal.
And our voice, independent and outside, is here alongside 150 of our people in an effort to tell this shit right. Where it's the real. And this is the Blog Era.
Subscribe now to the Blog Era, premiering April 19th, and listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Was there a specific Blogmosphere event that was the most challenging to research because at the time we're talking about being largely gone, or people's memories of how it happened being different?
Well, a lot of it, I could say that researching the Ilmore, and a lot of it is fact checking, right? But the Ilmore, which was a gigantic South by Southwest event in 2012, and there's a lot of research that you have to do to find people's tweets to confirm that they were there and get some first person stories from people, but it's fact checking. It's like, oh, are you sure that Solange was there? And then it's just like, well, a lot of digging to do that. But at the core of it, if this story revolves around the websites that were started and popularized by anonymous people in their spare time as passion projects, and those websites don't exist anymore, then it's a lot of hoping that you can either have the time or the patience or the wherewithal to go through archive.org like Jeff did to make sure that we were getting these facts straight. Oh, Drake was on a Mickey Fact song in 2008 or 9. Well, you got to find it. You got to make sure. You got to see what the comments were. You got to see what the caption was. You got to double check. So all this stuff that does not exist because Now Right as a website doesn't exist anymore, that was a humongous challenge.
Yeah, but I think that the biggest thing that we had to try and wrap our heads around was, and I don't think this is a spoiler because now the series is out, but the ending of it and the business side of things was a very tough thing to sort of understand because we don't know certain legalese, and we don't know how certain corporations connect to one another, and so you have to do a lot of talking to people and figuring out how everything could be pieced together, and what stabs in the dark you're making and what is actually nailed down. And so I think that was probably the toughest part.
Speaking of the toughest parts you've been speaking about, can you expand on this process of having to emphasize the purpose of this story you're talking about to everybody featured in the series and essentially amplifying their perspectives to service an entire generation? Did you feel any weight on your backs, having to tell that story about an entire generation? It's a personal story.
Oh yeah. I think that it's you nailed it, I think that it's this. Every single episode that we put out, I was always like, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm waiting for episode 3 when people don't like it because their story was told wrong, or somebody's story was told wrong, or somebody was forgotten, or somebody was. And so I think that the reaction has been really gratifying because it's this thing where people feel seen, even if they weren't themselves interviewed. And the people who were interviewed are very grateful to be a part of it and to also be represented in a way that is true. But I've personally felt anxious every single week, and I'm still processing it now that we put out the 10th episode today. but it was a huge responsibility to not screw it up. On the night before our first episode dropped, this is right after our launch party. The last thing I saw before I went to sleep was a tweet by somebody who said, you're going to have a long day tomorrow. And so and that speaks to two things. One, I need to stop looking at Twitter before I go to sleep. But two, it's that there was extremely high expectations for this thing. The blog era, everybody feels so intensely connected to this time. And so for us to put our stamp on it, it could have been terrible. But thankfully, thus far, it has not been.
I'd like to add, so Jeff's anxiousness around the episodes was during the rollout of the 10 episodes.
Right.
I think that something that worked to our benefit during the pandemic and the majority of the 3 years that we worked on this thing was that it was done quietly. And so expectations were minimalized, and because even though we spoke to 150 people, most of those people kept their mouths shut and they didn't get the word out. They didn't tweet about it. They didn't ruin this. And there wasn't a lot of, and that's not everybody. There were some people who said some things, to other people, and then those people called us. But overall, with lower expectations, it allowed us just to work. And
Right.
you got to remember the environment too. The world is shut down for a lot of this time. You're stuck inside a lot of this time. For us, we sort of got to avoid the realities of the outside world in terms of like, this is an airborne disease. There's people dying. There's, gigantic fears that we won't get past this thing, that it'll get to us or our family members or our friends. But we were able to huddle down and just focus on the story and focus on the information that we had and that we dug up. And we were able to move accordingly. And, the top thing we worried about, for better or for worse, was not the expectations of this full project. It was really like, the greater world and the future of it. And we got to a point where only when we announced it a few weeks or maybe a month before we were to drop the entire series, that's when there was this realization of like, oh, well, people know about it now. And then people came forward with their own opinions.
What you're talking about is really a moment in time which kind of speaks to this correlation between the pandemic freezing time and your intentions of freezing people's time to reflect on an era you're talking about, right? There's that correlation between the two.
For sure. I'll say this too, to further your point. The pandemic was a time when, and stats show this, based off streaming services, comfort music for people was music from their youth, music from their high school days, music that they went back to sort of like feel better in a time of great unease. And for us, our heads were strictly in 2007 to 2012. And so when people would ask us what we were listening to, hey, have you caught up on this or this or this? Outside of like watching Verses on Instagram or on Twitter, I guess, different platforms, our music taste, our music choices would just be in that time. And so time for us really did freeze. Yeah. And we were only living in this time in a very strange but
warped way,
right? Yeah.
So take me back to the blog era. What are your recollections of being around some of those bloggers, the artists, and these personalities whose stories you're telling? And what kind of personal connection and weight do those moments play in this series?
I think that what I remember about that time was how, and this is going to be a dumb point, but like how young everybody was and how accessible everybody was. The world of the blogs in person just wasn't that big. Whereas now the subculture has become the culture. And so what I remember about that time was that there was such ease in meeting all these people who became my friends. And so there was this community that I felt very strongly, meeting people for the first time on Twitter, and there was a general excitement, I think, that people have. But like, I don't want to get too far in the feeling like a grandpa and being like, oh, like in my day it was like this.
Right.
But it was a special time for us because we were all, it was like going away to college, like there was this reset that was happening between the real world, quote unquote, and the internet. And so people, including us, were able to, for the first time, find audiences and find connections and find safe spaces, for lack of a better word, that we could connect with people. And that, it was very fertile ground,
Right.
We're from 30 minutes north of New York City. We grew up with friends who had interests like us. We had, we had the internet, obviously, but Jeff and I happened to love rap and hip hop culture more than most of our friends from home. In moving to the city in 2007 and putting out these sketch videos on YouTube and having them get on Nah Right and Two Dope Boys and Misinfo and all the websites you hoped you would get them on, it meant everything to us and opened up an audience to us that we had never imagined existed for us. And then you go out and you meet some of these same people who were fans of our work, who became real life friends because they wrote for blogs, because they owned blogs, because they were in these circles that we were a part of. Like Jeff was saying, everything felt new, and all of a sudden we were able to relate because they were like-minded people one-to-one. We didn't have to have a disconnect from a friend back home. Like in my case, I went to school with people who we were friends when we grew up, but then I went off to college, and it's like, you figure out that, oh, I was only friends with these people because we all grew up in a similar place, not because we have similar interests. And then, what happens when you move to the city is you're able to choose your friends. And so because Jeff and I committed so hard to this thing that we love, hip hop culture and rap music and events and attitudes and dress and all of that, all of a sudden there were people like Low-Key who ran a website called You Heard That New, and we walked into the same party and it was like, oh, you're him and you're them. And all of a sudden it was like, great, let's, we're not in this thing alone. We can all move ahead together. And I think that was super important to us in a very, very exciting time because everything felt new and it felt like we were all at, in our 20s in charge.
And you felt together. It was a connection. Yeah. It was a connective tissue that brought you together for hip hop's sake.
Yeah. Well, it's also that we're all young and starving and going to parties and not being able to afford food. And so you would just live off of, hors d'oeuvres. And so like, there's this collective experience that we all shared, just going to like 3 events every single night. And so these bonds are created.
Nigga, you
Can you remember your first time experiencing a blog that was exclusive to somebody's fandom, and what kind of impact did that have on the way you think about the electronic discourse of rap?
Well, there's a lot of people, if you ask J. Cole and his whole team, they all grew up off of like the cannabis forums. And if you look toward, Joe Budden was on Box Den, and their internet was a little different probably than ours, because Nah Right was the biggest and best, and most seemingly the one with the best taste. And it was like, wow, like this simple, unique and striking place gets all their stuff first. And this guy writes with such authority. It's like, well, that's what I aspire to get on. And it's not MTV like it used to be, and it's not VH1 or Comedy Central. It was like, man, I really hope that we can get on there. And so our personal experience was like, you read Nah Right, and then it's like one day you're like, I want to be on Nah Right.
Yeah, I think like we were such huge fans of XXL magazine. And so I remember going to XXLmag.com every single day, numerous times a day, refreshing, because nobody had notifications back then. And so I remember going to there and spending all day on there. I remember going to All Hip Hop and spending all day on there. I remember going to like defsounds.com, which was a forum, and there were not that many websites, sohh.com, but the ones that I was on all day, along with not Napster at the time, but there were other services like that where you were just like downloading stuff on my very high speed internet in college. But so yeah, I mean, that was my internet experience. My internet experience was being on whatever hip hop site I could find. I wasn't super loyal to any one. I wasn't a commenter. I wasn't a real lurker. It was more about the content than the comments. And so, but that's what I was doing all day.
Byron Crawford was, if our introduction was SK and you start to find all the surrounding bloggers and pre-existing bloggers after that, it's thanks to the blog rules that sort of gave you this like little cheat sheet into what else existed in the universe. And Byron Crawford was somebody who sooner or later you figure out about him, and then you're like, wow, this dude is something different. He is mean. He's like towing a line, if not happily jumping over it. He is unwavering and unforgiving and just not a nice guy. But it was so hard to not pay attention to someone like that, especially back in 2006. And, with his voice, and voice, I mean like his written voice, you're looking at this thing and you don't know who the guy is, and there's one picture of him on his site, and you just think he's like the biggest, baddest bully of them all, and you can't not be there. And then you find that so many of the bloggers that we feature in that early time, the Sean Fennesseys, the Combat Jacks, the Dallas Penns, the Freshalinas, that they all congregated there, Jay Smooth, they all congregated there is a wild thought, because you eventually come to find through all these other people's voices and their own websites that they're not like Byron, but they were inspired to be free in how they spoke by Byron. So, and then later on, people like Byron and Fresh and Dallas and Jay Smooth end up on XXLmag.com, like Jeff was talking about, and it becomes this thing where it's like, oh, wow, this all-star lineup existed before. Now they're here at this quote unquote mainstream operation, and now I really got to pay attention to them. And it's in the moment a really thrilling time, because it's like, I know there's not a lot of eyes on this, but it feels so important. Every single one of them. The moment that Jay Smooth posts something, I gotta read it. The moment that Dallas says something, I know it's gonna be hilarious. And Byron or Elliot or DJ Drama or Sycamore or Fresh or whoever was there, it became a thing. And to Double XL's credit, and that's B Fred and Elliot at the time, and later SK, they were the ones who recognized that those voices existed before, and if they can get a paycheck, no matter how big or small, just something regular, doublexlmag.com can become a destination so people like us could find these people who originated long before.
Yeah.
And speaking of destinations, where were some of your go-to sources for music back then? And who would have been some of the artists that blogs covered that led you down this, big rabbit hole of discovery?
I mean, Cocaine Blunts, Andrew Noznitsky was a big one for me. I learned so much about regional Southern pockets through him, and just like very different sounds from everywhere else I was getting music. Not Right, obviously. Misinfo.tv was very important, and you could find anything from that you could. I mean, her personality also was so different from SK's, and the way that she wrote about music and wrote about the things she was covering. The smoking section, which was so thoughtful and long form and gave context to people like Big Crit, or Currency or Wiz. And I would also say The Fader, which is not a blog, but it was a website, and I found a lot, and also Disco Bell, which was a Swedish dance blog, which
interesting,
was so, they would post some hip hop, but a lot of other stuff that was just like interesting and fun. And like that's the other thing that sort of like we touch on, but like the world of the blogs was so much bigger than just hip hop. And so like you would find Wale on Disco Bell just as often as you would find certain dance remixes and hip hop remixes of dance songs on Not Right.
I think too, Jeff and I were creating videos on a weekly basis back then, which was all done independently, out of pocket. We worked odd jobs to make life happen, to be able to pay our rent or take a train. And by the way, if we didn't have the money to pay for train fare, we would just walk everywhere around New York City. We just, skip meals and make it work, much to our relatives' chagrin. But we made it work and made it happen, and we kept doing it. But we were working on these weekly videos, and every time, just like an artist, like a musical artist, every time that we were pushing our videos, emailing these websites to try to get on, I think a lot of our relationships with the blogs was based around that. Relationships meaning like reading wise, it was like, man, I would really love to be on pardonmeduke.com. It's not the biggest, it's not the most consistent blog, but it was an important one to us. And yes, later on, J. Cole was thinking the same thing as us. All he wanted to do was get on on Pardon Me Duke. But then you have random ones, the wrap up in Houston, or like Different Kitchen was a
from Canada,
was a strangely important one to us. Real Talk New York was important. You hoped that KarenCivil.com, AshleyOutrageous.com, we really wanted our work everywhere, and in a way we felt like the Wiz Khalifas or the Currencies, because we were trying to get our voice some shine as well. And so Now Right was super important to us because it was like the one we always looked up to, but all these other blogs around in smaller cities and smaller audiences mattered to us just as much.
What was it about Now Right that worked for you personally?
Well, SK felt like the arbiter of good taste. And look, hip hop was born in the Bronx 50 years ago. And, there's always been this New York thing, other regions looking to New York to get validation. And even when you get to somebody like Drake, a child actor from Toronto, Canada, just wants to get on Nah Right because there's a validation there. There's a legitimacy that comes from a real New Yorker, be it, from any of the 5 boroughs or even beyond that in Yonkers, where SK is from. There's something about like passing the smell test. It's like that guy can see through acts that are not good and he'll put on ones that are. And so it's like, if that guy who loves hip hop as much as I do, but has a platform and has an audience, gives me the cosign, well, then I'm something. And I think that's what was really attractive about SK and the platform he created.
Well, also, I loved that he was so stubborn about his taste. When he would put up songs that he disliked, and you knew that he disliked them because he would put for archival purposes only. And so like he would put up like, DJ Khaled remixes that had like 30 people on them, and he would be like, like for archival purposes only. I mean, like that was that. And it was a very active hashtag that he would use for that, like that. I think that
there was a brilliance to that.
Yeah, and also just that when he was posting Sean Price stuff, like his taste was very apparent. And I think that's what was so interesting about it, was that you got some things that you yourself would not necessarily be interested in, but then through him, you became interested in them.
That's right. And one more quick thing, which is that, like, yes, there was this New York bias. Clearly, he was like, if he liked Sean Price and that was the be all end all, he was New York to the core. But at the same time, he put on for Wiz and he put on for Currency, and that opened those guys up to me, and that was so significant, because I would have never taken a chance on those guys, doing this really spacey, blissed out, foggy music, if it wasn't for SK being like, hey, here's this new song by Spitta and you should really like mess with it. And I was like, okay.
What's going on? If you are still listening to this episode and enjoying the podcast, why not become a patron of Fly Fidelity at patreon.com/flyfidelity. Becoming a patron means you are directly supporting our show and helping us to create a new episode each and every week. It also means that as a thank you for being a super supporter, you'll be able to access exclusive content to you, including patron updates, offers and discounts, a monthly secret podcast, early access, and so much more.
I don't know that I remember my first time in the comments, but I do definitely remember the commenters who really like loved our. I do know that Nation was a huge supporter of ours. SK was a huge supporter of ours. Always wrote great things about us. I remember different commenters and their names and the ones that didn't like us, and it would be like, whenever we would put a video up, I remember always like scrolling down and you would just see like, 30 down, it would just be like somebody you doesn't like you, and it'd be like, oh, why this post? Why can't you just wait till the next one?
I think there was a naivete about us as well, because
that's funny. Yeah.
you go, I don't know what you're.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to say my thing, which is that, so we put out our first 2 videos. The first one is called Deconstructing Biggie, which is about UPS driver. It was about the Biggie line, your maximum salary admiring, don't be bad, UPS is hiring. Looked at that from the UPS driver's perspective and the DHL and FedEx guys, who thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
No. Okay.
What What
Yeah.
did I screw
No,
up?
you got it right.
I'm just like I was like going through the motions when I was telling you the story. Anyway, so the second video that one does very well. The second one we put out was an early retirement party for Lloyd Banks, and that video ended up on a ton of different forums, and every single one was talking about who are these white boys? Were they hired by Dipset to go at Lloyd Banks? Were they hired by the game? Like, what? How much money are they getting for this thing? Like all these very wrong but interesting, I guess, perspectives of what psyops we were working on behalf of.
And I think we were both naive to what the world was. I think we both walked in and we're just like, well, we get posted on Not Right, we get posted on Misinfo, like we do this thing and people laugh with us and some people laugh at us, but like, this is just part of the thing, and we're all in this thing together, until someone like Dallas Penn comes around and is just like, no, you guys are not welcome around here, and here's why. And it really shook us because we're young, we've met people, we hadn't met Dallas at that time, but we met probably some bloggers around town and felt like we were all part of this thing of ours. We all were part of the same thing. So no matter if some random person from the comment section, whoever this person with a weird name and no avatar was, said something about me, I don't care. But when someone who runs a blog like Dallas did, it was like, oh, this is particularly hurtful. And I thought we had an understanding here that, I'm coming from a good place and I know you're coming from a good place, but all of a sudden you're writing this stuff about me because you have a platform and you can. And as we talk about on the podcast, like it worked out, and eventually was this thing where he saw how hard we worked to be an additive to this culture and to never take away, and that we didn't go running off. We were 2 feet down. But in those early days, it was like, I'm not going to take those people very seriously who say stupid things about our videos in the comment section, unless it's somebody who I thought was on the same wavelength as me, goes that extra mile, and that happened, here and there.
Too much sauce, we're cooking up with mayo. Every time we hit the block, earthquake, oh. Insurance for the way I flood the Seiko. All the way to the bank, left in my Ayo. Everything is so lit. Wake up, wake up, wake up.
Can you expand on some of the bloggers who explored the links between new artists and where they were from as a way to give a wider context to readers? Who do you think did the best job of pulling you into a space of discovery and push the limits of blogging about critical regionalism?
I think there's so many people. I think that's every blogger had their own way of doing that. I think that Andrew Nosnitsky, in terms of critical thought, really pulled you in and had a certain way of writing that really spoke to me. I think that Jeff Weiss, for Passion of the Weiss, had a really interesting and so well written and so engaging. And same with the smoking section. I think those are probably the three most engaging in terms of depth of writing for me.
Yeah, I think that SK was super important because I valued his taste and he put me on to people that I wouldn't have given a shot to before. Also presented artists that I thought I knew and loved in a new way and new context. I almost, and this is way before knowing him and being a very, very, very close friend of ours. But Styles P on Nah Right was a whole like new artist for me. It was like, wow, I can appreciate this guy who, you know, I enjoyed his group material, I enjoyed his solo material, but like, you know, independent and like blog era Styles P was something brand new to me and something I valued so much. Bun B, I was able to experience him in a whole new way thanks to his appearances on Nah Right. So it was a central part of my hip hop internet experience, but also, you know, I have to give credit to places like onsmash.com who with their platform and they were singular in that they developed their own video player. I went there to discover people like 2 Chainz or you know, Freddie Gibbs or you know, Max B or True Life and or get something new from those guys. And you know, each website was a beautiful place in itself. And I'm going to be honest, it wasn't all about artist discovery, because if I went to missinfo.tv and Minya wrote a post about an artist, okay, cool. But if she wrote something about like going out to a concert that ended up being like super annoying, which made for a very funny post, I enjoyed that just as much, because it was like, I feel like I know who she is. And I feel like I could have been on that line, and I might have been on that line, you know, waiting outside to get in. And I went through the same frustrations as her. And like on a personal level, I was like, I understand this person just as much as I think I understand SK from Now Right.
It's interesting you talking about the video player on Smash, and one of the things you talk about in the series is the budget for music videos, which crashed, of course, during the blog era. And it essentially opened these gates for a new generation of directors. How do you feel about that shift post Rick Cordero, who you mentioned on that episode?
So I think that now in 2023, when we look at this shift, it's pretty striking in how quickly everything happened. And out of nowhere, Rick Cordero comes around because he, you know, or a Rex Arrow comes around, or
Show Me
Patwari, or Jason Goldwatch, or Spiff TV, and all these people who created content in a new way, just because they had a camera and a lens and a tripod and a bunch of friends and maybe some lights, and a YouTube channel, right? And it was all a beautiful thing. Today it feels so obvious, but back then it was like if you didn't get a Rick Cordero video, you weren't legitimate. You know, Joel Ortiz to me was special because all of his stuff was shot by Rick, and it was like, I'm gonna get that on basically a weekly basis. And I was like, you know, yes, we grew up watching MTV, and you know, when we went to our grandparents' house, and you're watching these gigantic videos, and then later on, you know, when they have behind the video, right? Wasn't that what it was called? Or making the video on MTV.
Right.
And you meet all these directors, and you're just like, wow, Dave Meyers and this
Hype
Williams and you know, different people. They're making these humongous videos, and the sets are enormous, and the crews are enormous,
and they're there for 3 days.
Yeah, and the look is enormous, and then all of a sudden, Rick Cordero is doing something that feels just as enormous, but you know that it's like a 3-person team.
Yeah,
and they're turning it around in no time. If they had a documentary crew filming Rick's shoots, and we've been on his shoots. In fact, he shot a video for us. But if there was a documentary team filming that, it would be probably very boring, right? As opposed to the Hype Williams, Dave Meyers, you know, gigantic sets that we were used to. And so this shift happens extremely quickly because money is no longer there, but artists are still hungry. artists still want to put their stuff out and present themselves in a certain way. And if you have someone like Rick or Rex or Jason or Show Me or whatever who have, or Spiff, that have these ambitions themselves, well, that's all the better. And thankfully, platforms like Nah Right and all these other websites, you heard that new and Exclusive Zone and the Jazz One, they were all willing to post these videos. Well, now you have a place for them where MTV is no longer.
When you think about the blog era, looking back on the blog era, what project comes to mind first?
Oh man. I think it changes on the day. Because there's so many different options, but you're catching me on a moment where I want to say French Montana, Coke Boys, but I'm gonna hold off. I'm gonna say probably like Pilot Talk by Currency.
I would say either Cushion Orange Juice or Crit Was Here by Big Crit.
Albert Anastasia by Rick Ross. You know, I mean, there's a lot.
And listening back to those projects, is there a sense of them being different? Do they feel different in today's landscape?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. This is a time of a lot of change, and as we've discussed, you know, it's media is changing, and budgets are changing, and platforms are changing, and presentation is changing, and style is changing. But also, you're dealing with a crossroads of consumer technology. So when you discuss somebody like Rick Cordero, he's able to finally afford a prosumer camera and lens and lights and whatever to get his work done. On a random laptop computer that you can get, whether it's Apple or Windows in 2008, 9, 10, you're going to either get GarageBand on your Mac, an early version of that, or you can download for free on some site some type of recording program that will allow someone to record as much and as often and as loud or soft or whatever. It allows them to record directly into their computer. You don't need a giant studio. You don't need a distribution plant. You don't need a whole team to put. You could just record something. You could download an instrumental to a MIDI, and you yourself can jump on it and rap however you want to rap, and bounce that track and send it immediately to one of the websites or a million websites, and hopefully get some coverage. And because of that, not everyone who has a laptop computer is going to be a professional recording engineer. So when you listen back to, and I say this with all due respect, when you listen back to early Currency stuff, it's not like everything is mixed or mastered. It's just like recorded quickly, put out, and it's itself a vibe, but it's not going to sound like the clean, professional, perfect piece of art that everyone may have come to expect from all the years that the studio system or that the major label system put out music, you know?
Yeah, the epitome of greatness, face it, no one placing close. Sweetness on the beach, that Walter Payton flow. On track to be the best, what you pacing for? Call play, still back, pump, fake and throw. Who that? Drew breezing on the field. To document this monumental shit real to real. No huddle game plan in my phone, outstanding. Most haters, commentators call them Pat Buchanan's. Those still slamming on the Cadillac, swinging lane to lane, gripping grain like a battle axe. Cameraman, capture the future like it's here for me. Why these cheerleaders cheer for me? We too hard to be crushed, too gone to be stuck, too fly to be touched, too much to be us. So we just let them do they thing, cause we something like the A-team. And I ain't talking about they team, I'm talking Super Bowl great team. undefeated all season. Championship, no Wheaties. Greatest 72 Dolphins.
Do you think that people take the blog era and everything that made it such a special time for granted?
Sort of. I mean, well, it depends on who you ask. You know, I don't think that it's an easy answer. I think that a lot of, well, no, okay. Let me back up. If you ask me, and my first response is people do not undervalue it. People actually, it's grown in people's minds. People lionize it, people nostalgize it. So I think that that's sort of the thing that we were contending with in this podcast, where we didn't want to just dive into a strict nostalgia play. We didn't want to just give everybody warm and fuzzy feelings. But I think that what leads to people having very big imaginations of how great it was is the fact that a lot of this stuff doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so that can, on the flip side, allow some people to forget about it, allow people to diminish its accomplishments because none of this stuff exists. So it's twofold. You know, on one side you have it's very, very large in people's minds, and in one respect you have people who don't even acknowledge it at all. But it really depends on how far outside the circle you go.
I agree.
When you look at the ascension of somebody like Mikey Fresh, who was shaping music engagement, you know, a genius recently, can you expand on that elevation of growth and how it ties into this discourse between today and the blog era in terms of there being this tug of war between globalism and retention of rules and gatekeeping?
Well, for a very long time before the blog era, there was a ladder at any job, and you work your way up it. Our dad, you know, for his whole life worked for two big companies. By the time you get to 2007 to 2012, it's sort of shifting a little bit. And so you get both someone like Misinfo, Minya, who creates a platform as a passion project and still has her day job. And she has, you know, she went to Columbia Journalism School. She worked at various magazines and every step of the way graduated a level. Her top assistant is Mikey Fresh, and Mikey goes to college not for journalism. He just has an affinity for it, signs on to be Minya's like number two and do whatever it is that she needs. Hey, I need this interview uptown. Hey, I need you to skip out on this class final and you know, join me for this interview out in Brooklyn. I need you to show up and cover this, or I need you to make sure you're online to do this. And it's a lot of grunt work. One can say it's like an internship in itself. And at the same time, Mikey's at these different publications, Vibe magazine, for example, that Minya, you know, once worked at, and people used to ascend in a certain way. But Mikey ends up having more power working on Minya's website, more power and more access, and becoming more important to a lot more people who would both read misinfo.tv and submit music to misinfo.tv than he could have ever gotten to at a Vibe. You know, his work at Genius happened after the blog era ended. But his the gifts and trips and access and notoriety that he would get in those 5 years working as one of the faces of Minya's website far exceeds a lot of the other quote unquote professional opportunities that Mikey Fresh had.
For anybody who are yet to hear this series, can you talk about the significance and control of the new music cartel as this force coming into the industry, and from the outside, just, I guess, really doing a service as renegades?
Yeah, I mean, it was huge. They, I think that a generation's taste was definitely influenced by this small group of people. In the same way that a previous generation had been shaped by MTV, BET, Hot 97, and XXL. I think that here were 7 or 8, and their staffs were bigger. So, but let's say like 7 or 8 websites that were really interested in a certain type of sound and certain type of artists, and they were able to platform them and changed not just an insignificant amount of people's lives, but many, whether they be artists who were able to find audiences, or whether they were commenters who found something to do during the day and they made friends, or even just like fans who were able to find music that they would never have connected to via the radio or establishment outlets. I think it's huge. I think it's and that they were able to, with credibility, put themselves in the same level as XXL, the labels, Apple, all these huge companies, and these were just people who were independently behind their computers.
And when we're talking about the significance of the New Music Cartel, it is significant because it is a group, like Jeff said, of 7 entities that all came together. If this was just the story of SK, who ran his site Nah Right, and he did it as a singular and lonely site, it wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. It wouldn't have been as powerful as it was, because he made the thoughtful choice to team up with who people could have referred to as his enemies or his competition. It's like that saying, what is it? Like, if you want to move quickly, go by yourself. If you want to go further, if you want to go faster, go by yourself. If you want to go further, you go with the group.
Yeah.
And
right.
And that's the story of the New Music Cartel, where they were like, you know what? Listen, our similarities are far more than our differences. And so let's team up. Let's all control how and what we put out there. And we will create something that will be a true force against all these systems that have been in place for so long. And the results are just there.
So I'm watching her fine ass walk to my bedroom and thought to myself, that's the shape of things to come. She said, why in the club you don't make it precipitate? Make it rain when you can make it thunderstorm. I'm like, why? The world needs sun, the hood needs funds. There's a war going on and half the battle is guns. How dare I throw it on the floor when people are poor? So I write like Edgar Allan to restore. Got a cord, umbilical attached to a place that can't afford no landscaping or window draping. This old lady told me, if I ain't got nothing good, say Nathan. That's why I don't talk much. I swear it don't cost much to pay attention to me. I tell it like it is, then I tell it how it could be. The hood be requesting my services. Oh, don't get nervous, it's step your game up time. These ain't them same old rhymes designed to have you dancing in some club. Niggas ride to me, women be off in they tub, exfoliating with they pom-poms, yelling go 3000.
What are your memories of experiencing the force that was drama mixtapes, Gangster Grill mixtapes, and being a fan of that series and seeing that footage on the news for the first time of the Don Cannon and Drama Raid?
I think it was very scary. Because we grew up, like I said, 30 minutes north of New York City. Hot 97 was our access to rap and hip hop culture. If you talk about Funkmaster Flex, DJ Enough, Green Lantern, Cypher Sounds, the list goes on and on. Mr. C, Absolute, Cast One, Jazzy Joyce, our taste, our interest, everything was there. DJ Drama and his mixtape run coincided with the internet being a big part of our lives. So when we had Napster and we had LimeWire, and we were able to download all those mixtapes and feel what was going on in different cities and get a sense of different dialects and different references and everything. And it was punctuated by this guy yelling and, you know, being clever and aggressive and fun on there too. And it was like he was the conductor. Well, I mean, how could you ever go back to, you know, life as we knew it? It was everything. And you know, when he did get run down on by the authorities, it was like, oh my God, this whole
way of life
is just over. And on a very, very small level, like our lives as we knew it, everything felt bigger. It was like, oh my God, how will we ever consume music the same again? And what is going to happen to this guy that we admired from afar or both those guys? And it was a weird, strange time that was certainly significant to us, but way more significant to them.
Yep.
Can you remember, if you were to take me back, your first time downloading? You mentioned being on Napster. Can you remember your first time downloading one of those drama tapes or anything of that era, anything of those years? What was the first thing you guys downloaded?
Well, the very first thing I remember downloading was, I had this service called scour.net. And I had heard about Napster. I was in like 8th grade, 7th grade, one of those. And I remember getting scour.net because it was supposed to be like the smart man's Napster. And I was able to download Magic Carpet Ride for the first time, and it took like, I don't know, like half an hour or something. But then I definitely used Napster, and I definitely used Kazaa and Aries and all these other services that were like it, Nutella, and just absolutely destroyed some of my computers. I remember losing like 10,000 songs in 10th grade.
Wow.
So
the worst.
And so, but I remember, you know, falling in love with Kanye when he first came out, and there was I'm not a huge Eminem fan, but when I was in college and 8 Mile had just come out or was about to come out, and I really loved his mixtape stuff that he was doing with DJ Green Lantern. And I remember trying to get a real copy of Cleaning Out My Closet, which was not a mixtape song, but Cleaning Out My Closet, and every single version of it was corrupted in some way by the record companies, which just like flooded Napster with these fake versions of it. And so every single one would be the hook, but it would end with, I'm cleaning out my closet one more time. And then it would just repeat. And so it would just be the hook over and over, one more time. And I was just like, I've been searching for that version of it for a very long time because it's so funny to me.
That's great. So nostalgic.
Yeah. And then the other song that I remember, which this was during the blog actual era. I remember downloading, there was a copy of Justin Timberlake and T.I. My Love,
right?
Which had Atlantic Records T.I. clearance as a drop on it every like 8 bars or whatever. And so I remember listening to that all the time, and like it doesn't sound right without that sort of thing.
Yeah. When it came to searching and music discovery, Napster was super important. LimeWire, Kazaa, all those sites were super important. And as we as we would figure out artists that we loved, it would be like, let me just go down this deep hole searching for anything I can find. And you know, it could be Kanye West, it could be you know, the DJs like DJ Green Lantern. I need every rip of his show on Hot 97. I need, you know, the newest Busta Rhymes. I need you know, then it was like, let me find the most random DJs. And then it was all about like my brothers and I would get a kick out of different DJ drops. And it would be like DJ Lieutenant Dan, which is just, you know, whoever heard of this guy, you know, before or after. And it was just like, I need the newest Khaled. I need the newest Sycamore. You know, on and on and on. And it became almost unlimited. And you know, you just downloaded and downloaded and downloaded.
Yeah. 31 Degrees from Texas. Like it was there, everybody had like their own sort of thing.
I love the way you dance, girl. So sexy. So sexy. So sexy. Come on. Put the money up. I bet anything I'd make your pretty wife stash that wedding ring. So if she don't answer when the celly ring, it's cause it's all in her stomach like a belly ring. Whoa. And when she saw the heavy blink, got gassed up, so I passed her a Henny drink. Gave her a little wink, made her step right out. Wanted to test the mic out, so I let her sing. But that wasn't all I did to her. Made sure I put my kids through her. All the girls say me be a slick shooter. Bang bang, I'm on my A game. They be down for me to take aim. Want me to blast from the jaw to the ass, man. They pass out when I'm all in their pants. And who would've thought it came all from a dance? I know what I wanna see when I see it, so let me see it, girl, let me see it. I love the way she dances. See, I love the way she dances. Girl, I love the way you dance.
Talk about the relationship making this project with Pharrell with his media company Overtone.
Well, for probably 2 years, Jeff and I worked on this by ourselves. There was it started off as a project that we thought would be 2 months. It turned out to be much longer than that. We just kept going. And as we considered, hey, maybe there is a partnership to be had, we spoke with a lot of places, obvious ones, big companies, ones that weren't obvious, smaller companies. And in the back of our minds, plenty of times we left meetings thinking to ourselves like, well, you know what? We still could put this out ourselves. We've done it before. But I think we both believed that this had a bigger opportunity to really be something special. And we went to LA for a business trip and happened to just hit up our old friend Scott Venner, who we've known for a decade and a half, who will happily tell you that we were his first Twitter follow, which is pretty exciting or not, depending on whether you have a life. But yeah, anyway, so Scott went to breakfast with us, and over bagels, he's just like, hey man, you know, or hey guys, what are you working on right now? We're like, oh, we've been working on this project. And the more we told him about it, the more he was like, whoa, this is really crazy. And I bet you guys would be a great fit for this new podcast company that Pharrell and I are starting. And we talked about it for a little bit, and we decided we would love to continue this conversation, and we did. And, you know, we could have signed up for any of those larger companies, and it would have been like fine, or at worst complicated. From an artistic perspective, it certainly wouldn't have been as artist friendly as Othertone has been for us. They have been fantastic artistic partners, letting us do what we do, not getting in the way, just, you know, being supportive and encouraging. But on a narrative level, you don't get this this group of blog era artists without Pharrell Williams. You don't get a J. Cole, a Wale, a Mac Miller, a Mickey Thax, Cool Kids, without that guy who was wearing a trucker hat, skinny jeans, and riding a BMX bike. You just don't. And so when we tell our story about this thing, and we talk about the Lower East Side and that whole scene of kids who were outsiders who wanted to make something of their own and pair high end and low end and skinny jeans and all over prints and make something brand new, they all look to Pharrell as inspiration. And to have him be a part of this story means the world to us. And that Other Tone, we were talking to Moses Choyola, who is the president of Other Tone, this morning. He called to congratulate us for the 10th episode coming out and the series being in the world after 3 long years. And he was like, guys, we are so happy that you were the first project that we put out underneath this umbrella, because to work on something and feel it as strongly as we did and as confidently as we did, and to see it work and to see all of our planning and blood, sweat, and tears come to fruition and be so well received is not only great for us, it's certainly great for our partners. And it's just been a joy, and we're very, very excited about the future.
What is it that you want people to take away from this series?
I hope that people see that this is more than just a music story. This is a story about capitalism. This is a story about race. This is a story about the idealized version of the American dream. This is a larger story about David versus Goliath, and can you actually create a utopia, and can it last? And I think that, even down to like what Jeff and I experienced in trying to find the right partner for this podcast, you try to figure out, well, how much can I keep this pure and how much can I sacrifice? And I think we found the right balance for ourselves in this project, but that's the greater thing in this world. And what people should take away from this podcast. There was a lot of sacrifice. There was a lot of trying to remain true and be pure and honest and true. And I think you'll see that for a lot of people who had blogs, it couldn't last forever without some concessions. And ultimately it's about, well, what do you prioritize, and how can you live your life while doing that? And just as much, what is the measure of success? And I think people really need to take stock and rethink what the definition of success is. And there's a lot to think about in the podcast, and we're very, very proud of all of that stuff.
We're done, but it's not over. We'll start it again. After the end of the day, it keeps getting better.
We gon' chase this cheese. Started from nothing, ended up with everything. From the house to the whips, taking trips any place that you care to name. Champagne, skydiving, easy wider papers, no blunt to the ones you mile high. Grinding now, I'm living how I'm supposed to. Laughing at you haters like I told you. I just tell the waitress keep pouring, get in front of the camera, keep posing. Too much bank to be rolled in. That's why I stay going till the cake gets swollen and you just can't fold it, or it's old and molded and the crust get golden.
Don't be afraid.
Taylor gang over everything.
I wish I could show my appreciation for this
podcast.
I wish I could respond to it somehow, or be notified in the future when
Fly Fidelity
updates, because it's so great. But I don't think there's a way I can do any of those things.
Uh-oh. You're wrong.
Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud and never miss an episode. Find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook.
My peoples, are you with me where you at?